Hello everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to speak today. My name is Emis Akbari, and I'm a professor and program coordinator at the School of Early Childhood at George Brown College, and I'm also a senior policy fellow here at the Atkinson Center. So, as David mentioned earlier in his keynote, schools have been quite active in the early years for quite some time. However, this is a real change from when we started tracking public delivery of early years in 2011 with our early childhood education report. With only a handful of jurisdictions at that time that offered full-day kindergarten in 2011, we are now at 9 regions that offer full-day kindergarten for 5-year-olds and 3 that offer full-day kindergarten for 4-year-olds. So what you're looking at is the percentage of enrollment in universal programs, and when you have universal programs, full-day kindergarten, what you see is that people use it. We have enrollment over 90% in most areas, in some places as high as 98%. So when it is available, we know that people use it. Next slide.
Sorry, there's a little bit of a delay.
No problem. Okay, so when we look at those that offer school-based kindergarten and pre-kindergarten programs, we also see the level of qualification isn't just similar across the country, but that qualification levels are high, with some jurisdictions such as Ontario and BC having educator teams. So what you're looking at here is the top row is for school-based kindergarten and the qualifications that are required across the 13 jurisdictions, of which you see all have bachelors, in some cases teacher teams with an ECE with a diploma. Similar for school-operated pre-K programs across the province. When they are delivered, the qualifications are more consistent and are high. BC is currently piloting their seamless day. Oh, thank you, that's better, Shelley. And so the empty boxes are those jurisdictions that are not yet offering a full-day program. Next slide. So, however, when you look at the childcare sector across the country, qualifications greatly vary. Here you see again in the top row what is considered, what qualifications are needed for entry-level staff in licensed childcare. So, for example, Ontario has no requirements, educational requirements for entry-level staff, along with 3 other jurisdictions that do not require any qualifications. Of those that do require entry-level qualifications, they vary. Some are as low as an orientation or 1 course, going as high as 120 hours for, again, entry-level positions. When looking at qualifications for those considered qualified or considered ECEs, they also vary from 1-year certificate programs to 2-year diploma programs. And it's important to note that no jurisdiction that require more than a 2-year diploma. None of it does not have any qualification requirements. Next slide. And unlike in school board programs, licensed childcare has ratios of qualified to unqualified staff. There is not one jurisdiction in Canada that requires that all staff that work with children need to have qualifications. Again, you see the unevenness across the country. So, thank you. Unevenness across the country. The more saturated heads are those that are considered qualified, and the less saturated heads are those that are not qualified. So again, that unevenness ranging from 33% of staff working with children requiring qualifications in Alberta to a maximum of 66% in Newfoundland, Quebec, Prince Edward Island, Ontario, BC, Nova Scotia, and Manitoba. Again, it's important to note that Ontario and BC, these vary depending on the age and the number of children, when ratios do drop to 50% qualified staff. That is at the same level as Northwest Territories, New Brunswick, Saskatchewan, and the Yukon. Next slide. So as we know, many regions across the country are dealing with severe educator workforce shortages. Much of these shortages are attributed to low wages that are plaguing the sector. Childcare operational capacity is as low as 40% in some regions due to staff shortages. New rooms are staying empty as there are no educators to staff them. Directors' approval are also increasing, even at the center director level. So here what you're looking at are four of the large cities in 4 provinces where wages do surpass the market basket measure, a living wage threshold. Quebec, who leads in this indice, only has wages that are 6.8% higher than the market basket measure. Next slide. Thank you. Data is not available for the territories, but here you see large cities and provinces, the remaining provinces that are all below living wage thresholds using the market basket measure, with Toronto in Ontario, as well as Regina and Saskatchewan at 31% and 30% respectively below the living wage threshold. This is not sustainable and not a surprise to see recruitment and retention challenges. Next slide. When we compare wages to percent of teacher wages in each of the 13 jurisdictions, again, we see that unevenness that I was speaking about. EC wages as a percent of teacher salaries vary across the country from as low as 40% of what teachers make in Northwest Territories to as high as 90% of what teachers make in Quebec. But what's important to note are those that have wage grids. So if you look at, if you look at the darkest green saturation, those are provinces and territories that have a wage grid in place. What you see is that salaries are significantly higher. The mid-saturation point of Northwest Territories shows the grid is currently in development, and Manitoba with the light green is the lightest, is the one with a non-mandatory wage guideline. So when wage grids are in place, we do see wages that are approaching or comparable with educational requirements considered, of course, to that of teachers. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I'm going to just shift gears now to show you some of our preliminary data from a study that we are doing with the support of 43 of 47 service system managers in Ontario that we call Knowing Our Numbers. Here's a table of reported wages by auspice across this province in descending order by median wage, which is the second last column. And the highest wages are reported from RECs working in the 2 public auspice types, that of post-secondary institutions such as George Brown College and directly operated centers such as the ones in the city of Toronto. The lowest wages are reported for the for-profit sector. And the new Ontario wage proposal will only be beneficial to those in the for-profit sector, as it is at 23 and change dollars. Next slide, please. So for this study, we included not only licensed childcare, but also DECs working for or in school boards and full-day kindergarten programs. And here you see wage differences in 3 example regions in Ontario, Toronto, Cornwall, and St. Thomas. And you see the difference in wages for those that are in the sector, in the licensed childcare sector, compared to those that are in the school board operated sector. With the same qualifications. However, our research also has found that those that are in the school board have higher experience and are also less likely to be from racialized communities. So in this sector, we see less experience, more racialized staff, educators. Thank you. So this is as part of a study that we conducted for the City of Toronto evaluating their directly operated public centers. And what we found was that Toronto publicly operated centers have the highest salaries. This, what you're looking at, is the average spending by category and by center type. And as you see, the TELC centers, the Toronto operated centers, spend a significantly larger portion of their spending on salaries and benefits. and a lower proportion on administrative costs because of their economy of scale. And still, we see low spending in other multi-site organizations that also would benefit from economy of scale, not reaching Toronto's salaries and administrative costs. So in summary, public or school board early years programs are more likely to be higher quality and have higher wages and benefits than that of their community sector counterparts. And I'll now, I think, Peter, I'll pass it to Peter.
Those who don't know me, I am a recovering public servant. I spent 25 years in Toronto Children's Services, primarily in planning and funding. Oh, you have it. I'm just quite a guy. Before I returned back to academia, and I've been hanging around OISI in Carlsbad primarily for the last 13 years. So that's me. But I also participate with some other groups, and I'm here on behalf of Building Blocks for Childcare, which is a non-profit corporation primarily dedicated to expanding non-profit childcare and public childcare. But right now, we're even more worrying about preserving non-profit and public childcare. So that's the thing I'm going to talk about is actually the result of a study that was carried out with substantial support from the McCuaig Foundation, and I've just got some of the basic comments. You can find the study is actually posted on the b2c2.ca site. I would encourage anybody to go and read it because I'm going to be very short. Next slide, please. So schools are really, really important to the childcare in Ontario and to the non-profit success story. In fact, the majority of centers are in schools. However, and this is big however, most of these programs are for kindergarten and school-age children. Much smaller proportions serve children below the age of kindergarten. So there is an official mandate to provide the childcare if there is a parent demand, but as we know from experience, it really depends very much on the school board and very often on the principal how many parents sign up to provide the service. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is, for many of you, this is where really the whole thing started. And that is with the Pascal report back to, God knows when it was, 2009, and when the kindergarten was really integrated with childcare as a before and after school program, delivered as a single program by a single team of qualified educators. Now, we all know that it's not really what happened everywhere. And what we try to find out in the study about the conditions when it happens and what is necessary to achieve to, in fact, follow up on the vision. So the school boards that actually implemented directly operated programs, not many of them, but in fact they provide a very secure home for children and families with younger ages. Unfortunately, it's still not part of the core mission of the school sector. And in the long term, for this integration to be successful, it has to become a part of the core mission. Next slide, please. So the study, which had some very deep structured interviews with about 50 school boards, it met with focus groups, with principals, and the service managers, which is the municipalities essentially identify some of these following problems. Obviously, space is always an issue. It became issue right when the first full-day kindergarten started in 2010. And that's because shared space has its challenges. Everybody knows that. But over time, this problem is actually becoming less and less. In fact, there is no excuse for there not being before and after school programs in a shared space. One of the ways that it's possible to actually achieve access to more childcare space is making sure that every kindergarten-age child is in a school-based program. There is too many programs go out there in the community which deliver kindergarten-age childcare, which really should be in a school. Staffing is always an issue, especially because of split shifts in the programs that are not integrated between childcare and school. Some of us went through that 12, 13 years ago when it started, where there was a severe backlash against the school boards actually delivering these programs, advocating that split shifts, that staff would actually like these split shifts. Many of you were in the infamous meeting. We had a TDSB, you were there, I assume Jane was there. When in fact, one of the operators claimed that their staff loved working in a split shift because they could go shopping and things. So it's still an issue. And expansion is, if you look at the targets that the province sent out to the individual municipalities, much of the expansion depends on the school boards. However, expansion costs money, especially if you're looking at programs for younger children. So until such time as there is sufficient capital money, we're going to see a problem. So now, next slide, please. The Ministry of Education can actually do a lot of things. Part of the problem is they treat childcare like they treat schools. They allocate their capital funding to a school for a childcare, as opposed to saying, here is your money, do the best, the most responsible thing with it. So for example, in Toronto, I think probably some of you saw in the news, they're lacking funding for 27 schools in the public sector. 17 of them are in high-need areas. Why shouldn't be the school board together, excuse me, with the municipality be able to take this money and say, we need to focus on equitable access to care. We know where the high-need areas are, as opposed to every school having its own budget. None of those budgets are big enough. None of those projects get built in the last 6 years. Another important thing is actually to establish the wage grids. That's something that was sort of promised in the CWELCC, and doing a one-time increases to the bottom of the wage scale. It's just not it. Another problem that probably we'll hear more during the day is the fact of a stable funding formula that would actually recognize the real operating costs. Okay, we're so focused over the years on user fees that we forget that in fact the true cost of operating childcare has got nothing to do with the prices that are being charged. Support for expansion and in B2C2, we've looked at various possible ways of funding capital programs, but let's face it, the true only meaningful source of funding is a major infusion of capital funding from the provincial government. There is nothing in the CWELCC that actually prohibits the province from investing in capital, and that together with the workforce are the two most important parts before we start expanding. Now, it is, in Ontario, as you know, is different from the rest of the province. because the money is really channeled through the municipalities or through the service managers. I think they got a new name, which I forget what it is. But in fact, that's what needs to happen. There shouldn't be somebody sitting in Ministry of Education saying this school can expand and this school needs childcare or not. Childcare, like education, is really a neighborhood affair, and that's where the decision should be made. One more slide, I think I have. Or go ahead. I may need to put this one in. There is lots of work that needs to be done on the school boards. I think part of that are very much procedural things, establishing a policy across the school board. Right now, I think it happens in some cases, it's very much the principal who decides whether they're going to have a child care in the school. It's just the attitude of the principals that sort of affects how the programs are going to work together. So there is a need for attitude that actually promotes this integrated childcare programs, although it may mean more responsibility for the principal, having more staff that actually works in the childcare. We know they're overworked, but ultimately the rewards, as we saw in the previous presentation, are there. So, finally, what I'd like to say is that's what we found. But where we should go forward is yet another question. To some of us, it's really integrating schools into the community, right? It's a neighborhood resource. Those buildings do not belong to the school boards, really, because the community paid for it in the first place. So we need to look at a system where children from 0 up actually become part of that community and using those assets in the community. We've got a study that in McCuaig's program we're looking at infants, low-income infants accessing subsidized childcare. And the average distance that the young mother with a child, infant child, between her home and childcare was 3.4 kilometers. So you imagine this mother with a child in a stroller, because public transportation out there is not that great either. Every morning in this weather or worse, winter weather, having to do that. So bringing schools and services to the neighborhoods, and especially the childcare centers, is really important. So that's all I got to say. I'm sure God was already writing email to me, but I should have said I'm not. But that stuff don't you owe me a beer anyway. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm Kerry McCuaig, and I'm a fellow in early childhood policy at the Atkinson Center, which has just been a dream job. You get to do really interesting work with amazing people, both on the academic side and in those who work with government in developing the policies and going through the whole implementation strategy. And although we have different purposes, we've been really blessed with how well we've been able to work together. So let's look at the latest thing that we've all been asking for, and that is a Canada-wide early learning and childcare system. And that has been announced. The money is out, but the system making is taking quite a bit of time and is facing a lot of challenges. So when we look at what the federal government supposedly will allow how it will allow its money to be funded under the agreements, it says that that it will prioritize investments in regulated early learning childcare programs and services for children under 6. And in most cases, this applies, although some provinces have been successful in getting the funding to overlap into the younger grades, so it's covering kids up to 6 or 7 in a couple of provinces. It also says that regulated programs and services are defined as those that meet standards that are established and are monitored by provincial and territorial governments. And then finally, it describes what those programs are, but it says it's not limited to those programs. So essentially what we have is direction from the federal government saying this is the money and this is the areas of this is where you will spend it. Next. So, nevertheless, so the question is the federal government in the way that this proposal is being implemented actually creating a greater schism between early education and public education and the transitions that take place before them. And so that we know all of the trouble with split governance as far back as 2002, major OECD study told Canada, get your act together, bring children under one ministry, give them one governing, give them one supervisory unit, like make people responsible for the public policy and funding and oversight, which oversees children from birth into the school years. They instructed us to fund it properly, and they instructed us to do more about the lack of equity that existed. Yet we still seem to be dealing with all those challenges 20 years later. There are complexities in trying to maintain oversight over a mixed system. There's different regulatory requirements, and that even though governments think that they have power, and when I talk to some of the folks at the provincial territorial levels, they talk about the frustration of really only being able to incent the childcare sector to meet standards, to expand, to enroll children with special needs, that they're not in a position where they can actually direct them because they are transfer payment agencies. They are not direct service providers, i.e. they're not a public service. Next slide. So when we get around to defining what early learning and childcare is, we were just told yesterday that we had a bill C-35, which provides no definition of what early learning and childcare is. Now, anybody can think about why that might be a problem, because childcare can mean many things. Childcare can mean, like your husband thinks that he provides childcare when you go out to see your friends. It can be grandma provides childcare, and we know that there is a push, a public push, to turn CWELCC funding for program operations into vouchers for parents. So in the absence of a definition, we could be in trouble. Nevertheless, C-35 is moving out of the Senate without a definition of what constitutes early learning and childcare. Stakeholders that have appeared before both the Commons Committee and the Senate Committee on Early Learning and Childcare have recommended that the funding be restricted to regulated programs. Some of the deputations by major childcare organizations have asked that specifically programs operated by school authorities be excluded. So they're asking that federal funding specifically not go to programs operated by school authorities. And what we've seen already is that the existence of the Canada-wide program has had a chilling effect on what governments are doing. So for example, in Ontario, which had which as Peter mentioned, in Ontario, just going back to this, coming out of the Pascal report, the recommendation was, and it was in fact in legislation, that school boards were required to directly operate before and after, extended day school programs. That legislation lasted for about 3 months because there was such a pushback from the childcare sector that they were losing their money-making kids, their 4 and 5-year-olds, that they did not want to lose that part of their business. So they insisted that they be included. So the legislation was changed to, you may either directly, school boards, you might either directly operate these programs, or you may contract with a third party. And that's the situation today. So as Peter said, a few, and a very few, school boards undertook the direct delivery of extended day programs. But when CWELCC came along, they were told, sorry, your parents don't qualify for the reduced fees because you are not a licensed regulated program. In Newfoundland, there was a big report that commissioned by the Premier, which came out with a recommendation for 4-year-old pre-K in Newfoundland schools. Once CWELCC happened, that got changed into we will have a pre-K program, but it will be delivered in the community sector. It was supposed to be universal. Correct me if I'm wrong, David. It was supposed to be universal by now. It is still having a hard time getting off the ground. And in Nova Scotia, you gotta love Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia, which was really going to break barriers and move into providing universal pre-K to 3-year-olds, that plan has been put on pause. So we can see that definitions make a difference, and that there could be, coming out of CWELCC, more of a schism between early learning and early education in the community sector and early education provided by public school authorities. Next slide. So, why do we have such a problem with public childcare? So, one thing is that education is one of those areas that is exclusively in provincial and territorial jurisdiction, with the exception of post-secondary education, as we know, and schooling for First Nations. And there is a real reluctance on the part of the federal government to be seen to be moving into this area. Particularly, there would be a massive pushback from Quebec if they were to do so, and the federal government never wants to have a fight with Quebec. Our second challenge here is that public education is public. And right now, we know that the prevailing ideology is if it's public, privatize it. So why on earth would we be going around expanding public delivery when there's all sorts of efforts to, in fact, privatize it? And with good reason, the provinces and territories don't trust the vets. They don't think that the money will be there. They don't know how long the money will be there. It's happened to them before, where they, Paul Martin's program, for example, where they went out, they took the money, they got things going, and then the money was gone and they were left holding the bag. Schools, as Peter was talking about, also have problems. I mean, they are underfunded. They're still dealing with trying to catch up after the pandemic. There's no jurisdiction which tells school boards or municipalities that they cannot operate childcare. But given the choice and the barriers, we see that this is not being something that's been taken up in a big way. Going back to the other point is that childcare operators find school-operated programs challenging to their business model. There has not been a case. We had it in Ontario when we tried to when the efforts were made to put in full-day kindergarten. It happened in the Northwest Territories. It happened in Nova Scotia. Is every time governments step up to say we're going to do more in the public sphere, whether it's through school boards or whether it's through municipalities, there is pushback. And finally, what governments want to do is contain parents' expectations. Like if you're being told that we're going to roll out a universal, pre-K program within the school boards, then parents expect it to happen, right? And they don't expect it to happen 10 years from now. They expect it to happen soon. If the service is being provided through transfer agencies, governments are quite comfortable saying, well, that's not our problem. It's just the transfer payment agencies that are giving us some problems here. So here's the challenges that we face. Next slide, please. But how real are the barriers? Well, in fact, provinces and territories can put a hat on it and call it regulated childcare. What they say is regulated childcare is regulated childcare. So if it's a school-operated program and it's included under the regulations, then it should qualify for federal funding. As we said, parents like it. I mean, we have had full-day programs go into the school system. We've had changes of governments who've said, maybe we don't like this so much, and then they had to backtrack. Why? Because parents said, ain't happening. We do know that when the extended day programs and the core school day are not integrated, that can lead to more fragmentation. It can lead to greater transitions for families and more challenges for children as they move between the two different streams. Funding, I know that when they announced $30 billion, that sounded like a lot of money. It ain't, when you compare it to other levels of government funding, it is actually quite modest. So we would call 30 billion a good start. But if we really even want to reach the targets in this in these first 5-year plan, it'll require more money. Finally, and this is no small deal, particularly when we see what is happening now, is that the big thing about public delivery is it curtails the market for corporate childcare. And if there is something that we need to be very nervous about as we're watching the rollout of the Canada-wide program, is you do not put that much money on the table and not have investors come sniffing around. And they are there. They are being very clever. They are putting themselves in place so that if there is a change in government come 2025, and then there's a change in prioritizing not-for-profit, they will be ready to take the funding. Many of them are already getting the funding now, even though nonprofit is supposed to be a priority. So the idea of prioritizing expansion in the public sector would provide a cooling effect. And just to say something, that the corporate sector doesn't grow because it provides more childcare. The corporate sector grows, and we've seen this in every Anglo-American jurisdiction. The corporate sector grows because it buys out existing programs. And that's the way that it gets to control the market. All right, before I get too excited.
So we're going to open the floor up for questions, but as people get organized, I just sort of, listening to these 3 super interesting conversations is just a reminder of how complex this sector is and how, as people in this room know better than anyone, and the pressure cooker and the different sources of pressure that any movement and any decision operates in, from the needs of the parents to the true cost of running it to the lack of system. Whenever people say system about this sector, I want to cross it out. There is no system. It would be wonderful if we could move towards it, and in part this is what we're talking about today. And as the questions are gathered, I'm not sure who, Z, are you doing that? I guess my question. Yes, I was leaving the back of given all the constraints and all the issues that you guys have raised, I have kind of 2 sets of thoughts. One is, with the current level of resources, what would you want to see done most urgently, each of you? And then if you were, or when you're asking, because this group is not if you were asking government for more, what would be your top priority there? So what are the kind of immediate calls for action coming out of what you guys have just presented today? And yeah.
I can start. Should I?
I think I will hear next.
Can everyone hear me? No. It's not on.
This one's on.
It's on?
You can just probably pass the mic itself.
This might be a bit provocative, but I think that as we talk about affordability, without educators being in those rooms, expansion is just not possible. So what is a priority to get to $10 or an average $10 a day, or to focus on wages of educators to ensure that the spaces that we currently do have are operational? So for me, wages right now are a big priority.
I mean, the federal government keeps saying that it's going to learn from Quebec. That's going to model, what's rolling out from Quebec. Well, Quebec has provided us with lots and lots of examples. The main thing of lessons, the main one was, when you lower fees so fast that it creates hyper demand, then what you get is bad childcare. You might get more of it, but it's not going to be good. So there would be an argument, I think, if we have to operate within the confines of the funding that we have, and I'm not agreeing that we do, but if we do, then my recommendation would be you slow down the drop in fees in order for there to be a balance between securing the workforce and expanding, because it's not a choice between. I mean, no politician is going to say, okay, I'm going to provide a really good service or really cheap service for a small group of people, and the rest of you can wait in line. It's not a winning strategy.
But isn't that what you're proposing happen?
That is what's happening.
No, I mean slowing it, the strategy that no politician will support is what you're suggesting.
Sorry. I think it would be politically possible to slow down the reduction in fees. It wouldn't be politically feasible to slow down expansion. It wouldn't, like, to redline expansion is I don't think a political winner. I think that parents could understand that we do need to slow down the fees in order to ensure that everybody gets a chance to participate.
Yes, just to sort of reinforce that, expansion cannot happen without having the infrastructure. We've got a physical infrastructure, not enough spaces, and we've got human infrastructure, not enough staff. You're not going to have enough staff until you pay them well, compensate them well. So the only solution, and you don't have to be an economist to know that if you reduce the prices enough, you're going to increase demand. So you've got two options, maybe actually three options. One option is that you completely stop reducing the fees anymore, as my colleague here.
Kerry.
I know, Kerry. You're getting old. The other option is that, in fact, you introduce some kind of income testing to those fees in such a way that you don't reduce the access for the low-income families that really need it. And the third option, probably more drastic, is that you start making provision to ensure that the low-income families have a priority access to those services, because we know they need it most. We know the payoff is the bigger, and we also know, at least from the City of Toronto data, the well-off neighborhoods have higher level of service. Your areas of childcare deserts are very much similar to the area of food deserts. We know where they happen, and we need to address those problems first. So it's one of the options is actually to start prioritizing access for low-income families.
So Peter's given us 6 things we should do first.
Well, first you completely stop anything. We need to stop and think about it. And essentially what happened is $25 billion or $35 billion is transferring money to individuals. It's not changing the system, and so if you really want to have system, you have to think it through. And unfortunately, that government had 7 years or 6 years to figure out how to do it, and I don't see the plan. All you see words. We see words about non-profit. We see words about quality, but nothing that really enhances quality. So stop the fees today and say, I'm going to fix the infrastructure. That's the big part.
Are there any questions from the audience?
Good. Yeah, that's not my best curriculum. I have two comments first. I'm Kimmy Scott from Inflict Children's Services in Ottawa. My first one is, and to add to Peter's list of what we should do first, is I think we also need to talk about the regulations. In Ontario, having one qualified early child educator, maybe two, depending on the age group, is a problem. It's actually not what we know allows for quality, and it also is not what most not-for-profit organizations have been doing for decades. So I'm really concerned that the new funding formula is going to ask us to reduce our level of qualifications. But that's not my question. My question is actually about multi-service, multi-site organizations. How do they fit with your vision of publicly delivered?
I mean, what was interesting is out of the Toronto study, so one place, was that in fact that the multi-site, multi-service agencies had lower staff compensation, spent more on administration and other and supplies. So we were surprised that we weren't seeing the same economy of scales from these larger operators that we expected. We also know is that when they are multi-service, that childcare also tends to subsidize. I mean, I think you knew that, Peter, from working at the city, that the childcare funding that comes in also subsidize other services that the agency offers. In making the argument for a public system, that doesn't automatically exclude other types of operators. But what we're saying that if we're really going to address those issues that are first and foremost, which is childcare deserts, lack of challenges to the workforce, the need for rapid expansion, we're not going to do it through the community sector. I mean, there is this wonderful line in the Nunavut agreement where they say just how difficult it is to, and how ridiculous it is, to expect voluntary boards to provide an essential public service, right? And if you're in one of the, if you're in a well-resourced, not only well-resourced in terms of money, but well-resourced in terms of human capital, then maybe you can pull together those kind of boards who can take something like this on. But we also know from talking to regions that they are tapped out. That those programs out there that are operating do not have any more capacity to take on anything else. So anyway, it goes back to you need a public presence. You need a strong public presence. That doesn't mean that nobody else can be operate in the sector as well.
Just one thing, and I know, Kim, you run a wonderful agency, but I think I think it's like with the school board, a lot of it depends on the attitude that the operator has or the agency has, the commitment to values, because back in 1980, I think there was an economist named Hansman who essentially said that a non-profit organizations are commercial organizations whose profit is reinvested in the organization. The number one business purpose is survival, right? Now we know, and we've seen it in Toronto where there's a lot of cross-subsidy, as Kerry mentioned, when the child care revenue ends up in other parts of the organization. So how do we ensure that the spirit of the organization is really truly non-profit, community-based, and so on? Just because you operate in 100 communities in Ontario doesn't mean you're community-based, right? That's, I think, the point that I tried to make. And it doesn't mean, and this is where I'm going to get lots of blowback, It doesn't mean just because you officially non-profit that you provide high quality of service. Right? Non-profit is really important, but it's neither sufficient or necessary condition of providing high quality service. Right? So we need to get off that horse. We need to really focus on quality and how we ensure it, and frankly, how we are accountable for it, how we monitor it.
What I wanted to just add to that is that the reality of it is that other auspice types, profit and nonprofit, are less likely to be in vulnerable neighborhoods. There's a huge gap in the service delivery across equitable measures. And I think, McCuaig, you can speak to this much better. With the funding coming through Canada-wide and parent fees reducing in some regions have already dropped down to $10 a day, we've created a two-tiered system where subsidized families have to jump through hoops, have to demonstrate a need, they have to demonstrate that they're working full-time, where other parents that are also subsidized by the federal government do not have to do that. So we've created a two-tiered system. There's gaps in childcare, deserts, as Peter was mentioning, in vulnerable areas and remote areas that are just not being filled with for-profit and nonprofit organizations.
I can't go just yet. Are there any other questions?
We have a question from the province of Ontario. What do you see as the role of the municipal governments?
Let me do that.
Oh, yeah, that's yours.
I don't want to invalidate 25 years of experience of working for municipal government. It is the community government. And as we've seen in Toronto over the last few weeks, when there was a real groundswelling of advocacy, your elected councillor is responsible, and that elected councillor actually runs the policy at the city, right? And frankly, I think that was correct. Alexander's finding a neighborhood-based policy is really important. Every neighborhood is different, the needs are different, and having somebody sitting at the provincial government saying, oh, we're going to have some formula, but that formula really doesn't recognize the fact that in this neighborhood, you might need a better ratio of children just because of the neighborhood. In this neighborhood, you have to allow some elements of funding because there is no public transportation and so on. And I think that's where the local managed service management comes in. And whether you call it consolidated social service management or consolidated child care management or whatever the latest version is, it doesn't matter, it's still the municipal level of government. And that municipal level of government is responsible for working with the school boards. It's not that the school board says, I have a space here, give me the money. It says, this is where we need that service, and this is where we need it first.
Cynthia?
I'm from the Toronto District School Board, so curious to know how, as school boards, we can sort of champion some of this beyond the work that we're already doing. So, for example, in TDSB, we have currently 42% of Toronto's entire childcare system from 0 to 3.8 located in our schools. We continue to put forward childcare 0 to 3.8 as well as before and after, but I'll focus on just childcare. In our capital submissions to the province, even though the last 28 that were initially submitted since 2017 haven't really got off the ground because of short funding. Those that have got off the ground, we as a school board have used proceeds of disposition and other pots of money to fund the ministry shortfall just to get these projects and childcares off the ground so we can serve families in our schools. So my question is, what else can we do from your perspective to continue to champion this? Because conceptually, we obviously support it, we believe in it, for all the reasons that you cited today and more. And I think, as I think about our role in the school board in supporting this, we want to continue to do more. So what else is there in terms of opportunities for us to continue doing this important work? And I'm curious to know if you're going to say directly operate childcare.
Yes, I'm going to say directly. And in fact, I think, failing a province changing its mind about 12, I think you should be running licensed childcare. Because all these parents are there in mostly low-income areas, suddenly having to pay a full fees, and we know how much higher those fees are. I think it's in the interest of the parents, and in fact, if you do that, if you license it, you're going to have much more demand in that. There's some little policy issues, like, you have to sign up in February for Kerry, etc. All of those things are minor things that can be dealt with. But in fact, running directly operated licensed childcare, I think, would be my answer.
Do you want to add anything, Kerry? I mean, it does create a really interesting and challenging policy landscape, because what is being proposed today, unless there was serious change in how the different levels of government operates, would require even more cooperation between the municipalities and the school boards than already exists. It's in play, I'm sure, differently in different municipalities. But in the same way, Cynthia, that you're asking, what can the TDSB do to bolster this? The municipalities can ask that same question. To move in the current landscape is going to require a lot of cooperation and collaboration. Any other comments from our panel?
I'll just add to that. Just to add to your point, Cynthia, French language schools have had full-day kindergarten for a very long time. And to your point of using other funding sources, so they've been using federal language funding to be able to do that. Manitoba, although a 5-year-old full-day kindergarten is not provincial-wide, there are school boards that do deliver it, and they're, as far as I know, using school board funding to deliver full-day kindergarten in their boards. So there is precedence across the country using other funding sources to move in early education at the school board level. That's not necessarily province-wide.
Can I just one thing, and it goes to that survey about the 0 to 4, is that unfortunately, because the way ratios work and the rules work, every time you expand access in kindergarten, you change the proportion, right? And so suddenly this 70% or 80% or whatever it is becomes fulfilled with the kindergarten kids at the expense of infants and toddlers. And if you look in places like Toronto, where in fact the growth of commercial programs in infant and toddler care is such that right now it's over 40% of infant and toddler programs are operated by for-profit operators or commercial operators, right? And so we shouldn't be blinded by expanding just in a kindergarten age program and saying we're maintaining our proportion of commercial and non-profit. So it's really important for the school boards expand those little young kids as well. And frankly, those are the parents who shouldn't be walking 3.5 kilometers to get to a childcare. That's what the community school is about, what the community childcare is about.
So thank you. Now you can get off the stage, Kerry. Thanks, everyone.